Welcome to WhatTheActualDev, the no bullshit development podcast.
No fluff, no marketing, just honest conversations, practical insights, and expert advice from developers who've been in the trenches.
My name is Aaron.
And I'm Brian.
Let's dive deep into the human aspects of the software industry
And support each other on this journey. Yes, but I figured out how I'm going to do it though. And I'm the DIY type of guy.
Are you just going to shut yourself in the closet until you get your room redone?
No, before I was going to just put a big old blanket over me, like hover it over the monitors and then cover my head. You know, like the aliens are coming or something.
Yeah, but, and then your wife will be sneaking in there taking pictures again.
Yeah,
like,
it'll just be dark in here. And then I'll just have a little flashlight blow me on the face. Forever.
Like, oh my God.
Like Smalls on Sandlot.
It'd be like reruns of Are You Afraid of the Fucking Dark?
That was a great show, man.
It was amazing, but
they tried to bring it back and then they made it like a little too dark. And
yeah. I mean, my kids liked it. I don't know. I guarantee people like Blake would not know what the fuck it was.
Yeah. That's times it. Well, it's back then. What else was there? Afraid of that. That was Nickelodeon, right? So you had all that. It's like kids SNL.
Goosebumps.
Kenan Thompson, who's now on SNL.
Yeah.
He was one of the big stars there on all that. And it was like a kid's version of a skit show.
I fucking hated that show.
I watched it all the time. So it's kind of funny to see him in the SNL thing. You're like, you were groomed for that.
It's kind of weird seeing the difference between the shows that you would watch and the shows I would watch. Like, because I grew up on X-Files.
Yeah, I had some X-Files, like late reruns. Yeah, and like later shows.
Yeah, my parents were recording that shit on VHS and we'd rewatch it.
And it's like when you pick up Simpsons and Seinfeld. Like I was young enough that I know it was on TV and I watched a few episodes, but I had no clue what they were talking about. And even to this day, like I quote some stuff and I'm like, I never watched that episode fully or, show the storyline.
Okay, so what are we discussing today? Imposter Syndrome. No, that is one show.
We're procrastinating because that imposter syndrome is kicking in for us doing this podcast.
My whole life's defined by imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. My career.
A career, fatherhood, school, pretty much everything.
Yeah. I think we all do.
Well, I mean, so yeah, if we're gonna discuss imposter syndrome, I guess we jump right in.
Might as well kick us off, Aaron.
Well, I mean, so what? Well, I mean, actually, no. I'm gonna make you do it. I'm gonna ask you what is imposter syndrome to you? Like, what, in your words, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I've studied the topic quite a bit, seeing other people's opinions, and kind of comparing their opinions to how I've experienced it. And, a lot of people define imposter syndrome by feeling like a fraud, like you don't belong here. And I agree with them to a point, but I like to kind of change the angle and just think that it's just growth. It's uncomfortable growth. And if you are growing, you're always going to have a level of uncomfortable things going on because you're stretching your knowledge, you're stretching your abilities. And so you're always going to feel slightly incapable of whatever you're about to take on. And so, yes, it's feelings of fraud, feelings like, can I do this? Can I accomplish it? But at the same time, for me, it's a signal to me knowing, okay, I'm getting out of my comfort zone and I'm expanding my knowledge and my abilities to what it is. So for me, imposter syndrome feels like it's always there if you're always growing.
Yeah. So but at its darkest depths, what is it like? What when your brain is at its shittiest, what is it saying to you? Like,
run away.
Like when your brain is like being an asshole to you and is like really kicking that imposter syndrome in, what is it saying to you? Like, what is it like really?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's starting just being incapable. Why am I spending the time here to do it? The energy and because I'm not going to succeed at it. I think for me has been the darkest. It's been a doubting uh, step in my self introspection. So yeah, I honestly, part of that runaway, break the glass and pull the emergency handle and end everything. In that where you're working on in that process, because you're like, why am I doing this? I'm not going to succeed at it, and everyone's going to judge me, and they're going to say I failed.
Kind of reminds me of the Finding Nemo thing. Whenever they're like, "Swim away,"
Yes, yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's uh that's Brian.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. What
well, and
about
I
you
mean,
though, Aaron?
I did. That's. I mean, when it comes down to career wise, yeah, it's definitely probably along the same lines for me. It's especially career wise for me, it's getting into the deep end of the, like, we're in a meeting, we're looking at code, and it's just like, oh shit, I don't know what we're actually doing here. I don't know what this code does. And in the moment, it's like, oh great, I don't know what I'm doing. These people are way smarter than I am. Like, why am I even here? Like, these guys are
Hmm.
smarter than I am. Like, why am I leading them? Like, or why am I even on this team? Um, and I mean, deep down, I know that, you give me, 15, 20 minutes alone with the code, and I could tell you what it does, and I could probably tell you how to fix it. But, in that moment, it's a lot of, oh crap, like, I can't tell you what this does. And I mean, I suck at tests. So, you put me on the spot with anything, you're not going to get an answer.
Yeah. So
I'm
you
just not good
you
with that.
loved the interviewing process.
No, no, I
Write
did
a
not.
recursive method of the Fibonacci sequence using C++,
Uh,
even though you're a node developer.
you lost me at C++. Um, Now, you give me some C sharp or something, a little less intensive than C++, and I can probably knock it out. Like something little less derivative, and we're good. But
Assembly.
and I mean, it kind of bleeds into more than that. I mean, obviously with fatherhood, at least for me, it was just like when we had our first kid, Connor. I was just like, who the fuck gave me a kid? Um, why would they do this? Like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Um, and I still tell the kids now, it's like, I'm winging this every day since Connor was born, and probably will be until all of you guys are grown and out of the house. So
Hmm. Hmm. Do you think when you feel in that imposter syndrome that it's like a one main trigger, or can it be multiple triggers, combination of certain things
I think it's
when you
dependent
experience it?
on. I think it's dependent on the situation for me.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, if it's career wise, it's definitely situational dependent. Um, with career based, you're going into any situation. If you have a bunch of engineers that are more adept at the certain language that you're looking at or something like that, not understanding what they're talking about, that's it's going to trigger something, in my opinion. Um, and I mean, unless you're overly confident in your ability, it's going to probably trigger something. How you handle it is obviously different based on each person. So, I mean, I think that obviously is
Yeah.
how it.
Yeah. Have you ever had, when you've experienced moments of that imposter syndrome, like prevent you from moving forward? Like that's catastrophic. All stop experiences of where you're just like, all right, I'm out of here. You know, I need to find a new job. Uh, Experiences, or is it kind of something that flows just kind of in the background for you?
It's kind of funny because we were talking about the interview process, and it's it's definitely prevalent in that for me. Um, because I've had interviews in the past where they're asking me to solve a problem that I know I could solve, but because someone is watching me, I can't think through it in the way that I would naturally think through it.
Yeah.
And my brain is just immediately like, okay, you fucking suck. You're never going to be able to do this while they're watching you. Just give up now. And I've definitely had those instances where I'm just like, okay, you know what? Thank you for this opportunity. But I'm gonna go ahead and take myself out of the running. I appreciate the time, and you have a good day.
What's
And
unfortunate with that event is most likely you could have killed that job, and it was a horrible interview experience set up from the company's perspective.
yeah,
I've
exactly.
been
But
in the same boat.
because I mean, usually like they're having you do this thing that you probably will never do in your day to day
Yeah.
career. It's kind of like if you're interviewing for a people management position and they're asking you to code an interface for something that is, it's like,
Yeah.
am I coding an interface for a person?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because otherwise, I don't see how this is relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you get the people that want to ask those like elitist coding questions. Again, the Fibonacci sequence. That's one I've had common where you're just like, what was that again? Because you like I said, you're on the spot. There's a lot of stresses going on in the interview, and your brain is thinking of multiple different things. Do I come across properly? Am I sitting upright? That person's not really paying attention. Am I belling it because of that? And now I got to remember the Fibonacci sequence. Oh, and you want me to write it this way? Oh no, what was that? Like almost to the point they expect you to recall all this stuff on the top of your brain.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm with you. I've walked out of many job interviews feeling extremely incapable of like, man, I just need to quit being an engineer and go back to my, old car detailing job. And yeah, and I look back now as one that has been able to create that interview environment for others. Uh, they did it all wrong, in my opinion, when I've had those experiences walking out. My
Yeah.
my favorite questions from people have always been kind of the make you think abstract questions. One of my favorite, it's so silly, but one of my favorite was you have a brick, like a standard, brick you would use building a house. And he's like, just start listing all the different ways you could utilize the brick. And it feels kind of funny at the moment, but I asked him afterwards, why you asked this question? Like, what is that? And his reply really was, I wanted to see if you could think outside the box. I wanted you to see if you could be a little more dynamic and come up with non-normal ways for that brick, and that was all over the place. I was talking about leveling, your coffee table if your leg was broke, about drilling a hole through it as like a pencil holder, door stop. Yeah, you could use it in a wall, but we all know you can use it in a wall, whatever. Here's these other things, and just start rattling these things off. And like I said, it felt like a goofy question then, but as I've spent, time thinking about it, I really like that approach because you're trying to really think, how does this engineer approach a problem? Similar, like you said, I don't like solving things on the fly. It's not how I normally work. And it's true, but this goes, okay, how does Aaron think of a problem, process a problem, talk about a problem, communicate with a problem? And that's honestly how you solve all these engineering problems.
Well, I mean, I think that actually helps from the aspect of fighting imposter syndrome in the interview itself. And I think that that's one thing that's kind of overlooked in the interview process is that they are actually feeding that monster themselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's only a disservice to the person that's doing the interview because they're not getting a good representation of who they're actually interviewing. They're getting a representation of that person's fears.
Yeah.
Um, and that's they're taking a person that's already in a very vulnerable, whoa, fuck that word up, vulnerable situation and just feeding that even further, and
Yeah.
it's not good for anybody. And I think that that brick situation is a good way to kind of feed against that.
Yeah.
And I mean, really, when it comes down to it, like, I don't give a shit if they know like how to break down the Fibonacci sequence. Like, if they're not going to fit culturally, I'm not going to be able to teach them anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
If
then
they
you lead
can,
into toxic work environments or your culture work environment. Yeah.
yeah, which we've both been in, and
Yeah.
honestly, we were in one together. Um, it's if they fit culturally and the company culturally is a good environment, we can teach them whatever they need to. I mean, if they have
Yeah.
basic understanding of OOP and stuff like that, depending on the situation. I mean, obviously some job placement is not OOP, which I understand. But, usually in the environments that you and I have been in, it's mainly OOP. So that's
Yeah.
why I said that. But
Well, and I think it varies too with that imposter syndrome. You see a lot of junior engineer jobs. I would honestly say my hardest interviews were as a junior engineer. As a senior engineer now, like it's it's so non-technical. It's kind of funny how I've gotten hired in a few positions. Maybe I just smile really well, and they okay, you can come work with us. But when you're a junior and you have to kind of justify your existence there a little bit. I think the company can come across in a poor environment of saying, hey, how much am I going to train you technically? How much leash do I have to train someone? We talk about that. Like someone that's a good culture fit's fantastic. But how much time do I give that person I hired to train them what I technically need to do? And I'd say most common companies I've experienced, they're hoping for a ramp on period of like 30 days, to understand the domain from a group of people that have been working the domain for multiple years on top of the language itself. And that's a huge waterfall to drink from. And it's always interesting with cultures or companies in that sense of like, I want to pay you this little bit. I need you to make sure you know this stuff. And I'm expecting this higher stuff from you when I do hire you. And that definitely, as you're living through that as an engineer, I mean, my first 3 weeks of my first job out of college was very much like that, where every day I came home and just like, why am I here? No idea what I'm doing. And like, if you let that stack up on you over time, that's a big weight to burden on you. A lot of doubt, self doubt. That you really have to question yourself. I did like, am I appropriate in this field? And I have all these other engineers around me that are smarter, that think more of that engineer way and very logical and literal. That just it didn't click for me. And I think, like I said, that culture can feed that imposter syndrome of really expecting more from a junior engineer than really you need at that start.
so do you think that actually feeds into your triggers? Do you think that's part of what actually built your triggers?
Yeah, I mean, because for me, imposter syndrome has always just kind of been like a background signal throughout my whole career. I'm always striving to the next thing. I have this mentality that the top of a mountain is the bottom of another. As I've gone through my career, so I've learned what those triggers are. I've learned how to handle the triggers, and I think I have, from my personal experience, just how I was raised, like a certain perspective of how to come up with an anti pattern for imposter syndrome to be able to just keep going. And it's helped me a bit, quite a bit to get through my career because I just, head down, keep bowling through. But you have to understand, like, view it. You have to be aware of it. So that's how I want to say, be aware of that posture and what it's building up on you, and that stress and that mental, insecurity, and making sure, okay, where's that relief valve? How do I correct this? And if a culture, no, I don't expect all companies to cultivate that type of culture. I mean, that's something like self-awareness that I think every individual needs to have for their own self-reliance of dealing with this process.
Well, I think that, I mean, obviously the software industry, it kind of, it almost requires it. I hate to say that, but with the level of knowledge that a lot of these positions require, it it's almost like a cause and effect situation where it's almost always going to be there. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of it, because of the way that cultures are built at a lot of companies in this industry. And until I think a lot of these companies actually start to realize how big of a problem imposter syndrome is, and start really taking that as one of their initiatives to combat for their engineering teams. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a company wide thing. I mean, I think it should be, but I don't think it'll ever get to that point. Um, but I think as long as they make it like at least an initiative for the engineering department to kind of combat, I think
Mhm.
that it'll definitely get better. But I don't think it's ever going to really go away because
Mhm.
it's just a part of this entire way that the situation is built in software, in my
Well, and it's
opinion.
expensive. I mean, if you think about it from a business perspective, it's expensive to have that proper environment, to have a long runway for people, multiple people to deal, to overcome those feelings and grow and nurture, those skill sets potentially that you may need to train. And I don't think a lot of companies put enough in their budget for that type of culture to cultivate that. I've been in a few companies where it's really hunt for what you survive on, and if you're not cutting it, you're out. I mean, Netflix's motto was like that, and I don't know if it's current like that, but they were like, we're not a family, we're a team, and we're all working as a team to win and succeed. And there's a lot of competition there, and it's hard because it's a very cut and dry mentality of a work environment, but our sector is not very cut and dry. When you're really working in an application and really understanding the layers of, let's go from front end to the database, back end, we like to kind of categorize those tiers, but honestly, what's needed for an application varies by application, and it's a spectrum. And so your skill set, my skill sets could complement each other or contradict each other, and cause issues. And you have a lot, you could hire a lot of good engineers that are all stacked in one, this is my wheelhouse, and we're all, you're lopsided on that ship, so to speak, or on that, that measuring, what do they call those? The whole
The scales
weight.
of justice. I don't,
Yeah, that's my what a picture. Yeah, but there's a name for that thing. We're just gonna cut that section. But I think that's part of hiring too, is realizing, culture. Yeah, you're a good person, but also skill sets. Hey, I need to make sure I have a balanced skill set amongst what my company needs to develop and build. And like I said, it's a wider spectrum now. You think of like the definition of full stack engineer and what that meant, say 10, 15 years ago, compared to what that means now, is a totally different game. And then you'd have, go back to your interviews to recall that on the forefront of your brain anytime there's a random question to prove that, hey, you know your stuff because you are, Chat GPT and Wikipedia in human form. It's just not realistic.
well, I mean, that's part of the reason why I kind of put myself in situations where I end up learning, front end, back end. I have, worked with, the CI/CD platforms. I've worked with AWS, GCP, Azure. Like, I've worked with all the individual pieces. Like, I think the one thing that I have problems with is the Kafka type pieces. Like, for some reason I just can't wrap my head around Kafka, and like I'm still trying, but like for some reason those systems just fuck with my head. So
It's because it's in the ether and it's everywhere.
yeah.
It's event streaming, man. It's just in the air.
Event streaming in general, I mean, like I mean, it's obviously something that's extremely important, but it's like I just can't get
No,
my
I'm with you. Like when people talk about it in a general sense of like, hey, this is how we're going to apply it to our business, and these are things you can do. You're like, oh, that is cool. I really see that innovation there. And then you get hands on the keyboard to try to implement, and you're like, shoot, okay, where's our database? You that single source of truth. You're like, we don't have that really. It's a little different.
it's
Like,
like
okay.
blockchain. What I
Well,
mean, so like from that perspective though, I mean like with the company culture and like the role it has on helping either make imposter syndrome better or make it worse, where do you feel like it lies in the architecture of, or not necessarily the architecture, but the corporate ladder, I guess is a better way to look at it, to help combat that? Like in my opinion, it's from the top down, like it needs to be like a company wide initiative. But I think the ones that like definitely have the most influence over it are the direct leaders of the engineering teams themselves. But where's that lie for you?
Man, that's a hard question, to be honest. Really, yeah, I can agree with the top down approach. You try to set up a culture that cultivates that. But at the same time, you have to hire the right people as your lieutenants to help push that down. Like you said, the engineering directors and directors of various departments, whether it be marketing or sales or whatnot. But I think it has to come down even to the developer level. Um, we have a tendency in our field to say, hey, as you're a really good engineer and you're proving yourself, I'm going to promote you. And that kind of goes down a management ladder route, right?
Hmm.
Companies like Microsoft, Facebook, I mean, the big tech companies, they have all kind this crazy ladder for just to stay engineering and technical, right? Because they have the applications for it. You can be an evangelist of XYZ tech. You can be an R&D of quantum computing and whatnot, because they have the money to be in all these different spaces. But when you're looking at the average company, let's the small, medium corporate company, there's only so far from a technical perspective that you can grow for a business to be able to sustain you. And so you end up kind of going that management route, because if anything, you expand, you scale out from the amount of your in your development department instead of up in that sense of those ladders. And so it always seems easier, and it seems like it's almost muscle memory in our field in the corporate world to say, hey, you're a really good engineer, we're gonna make you a senior engineer. You're a really good senior engineer, hey, we're gonna make you a team lead. And if I can replicate your ability as a senior engineer to these juniors, that, hey, I just got, N number of more errands on the development team, we're going to succeed. But just because you are a good engineer doesn't mean you're going to be a good manager. It doesn't mean you're going to be a good pair programming senior lead that help teach and cultivate the young guys unless you want it. And are they out there? Heck yeah. I knew as I took that lead, like, okay, I'm going to start teaching people. I need to start figuring out how to do that. And we've talked about that in the past. Um, but from the top all the way down to the, bitter bottom, there's one thing I think of that helps solve imposter syndrome is pair programming. Having that new person on the team have someone to work alongside with to help get them up into speed with the domain, because that's a whole different beast than it is just learning the code stack. Like, how does this industry work to start giving quality to what I need to do? And I stand against the perspective of all my new engineers go work on bugs for the next 2 months while they learn the system. I really don't like that approach. But if my pair program, my senior guy, is not great at cultivating that knowledge and sharing the knowledge, and he's more focused, I just want to get stuff done because this is what I do really well. He's not a good or she is not a good individual to have to bring in that new person. So
Yeah.
it is from the CEO down to the bottom. But I think as you go up, it's important for them to go, from CEO to go down to that bottom and really see who's working through this. Who are my people that are the sergeants, so to speak, of the departments, the squads, to your lieutenants, to your generals, and up and down the ladder. And I don't see that too often, which I always thought as a CEO, I would assume like your job is to make sure the company succeeds and your culture succeeds. And you should be able to get into those intricacies and understand the people that you have working for you. And I know there's a point of delegation to that. You're like, well, my best buddy that I trust, my right hand man is going to hire more people, and I'm going to trust with who he hires. And you kind of have that, few degrees of separation. You think they're going to be good, but in all honesty, I think it's important from the top from time to time to go see, think of a tree, go through the end of all those branches within those departments in your company to make sure you have the right people
I think
and give them the
that's
tools.
I yeah, but I think that's actually imperative that the CEO, if they're not going out and meeting the people that they're actually having hired in to actually help build out the company, then they're not keeping enough of a touch point on the people in the organization. I feel like that's a huge disservice to the company itself.
Yeah. And
Um,
I'm saying you can't compare the CEOs of like large companies and small companies. I think you have to compare apples to apples when you're looking at specific companies and be like, well, here at Microsoft, like Satya is not knocking on my door here going, hey, Brian, let's go out to lunch. type thing. But that's a different game than when you're working with a team of, say 10 engineers in a company the size of 100 people
Yeah.
or even a few hundred people. And again, I'm not a CEO. I have not been a CEO for many years to say, this is how we do it. I'm sure there would be a lot of CEOs saying, well, good luck doing that. It's a lot harder than you think. I'm just trying to make sure you have a job tomorrow and you get your paycheck in 2 weeks. So this is what it is. But again, from our perspective, being in the trenches at the desk coding the products for these CEOs, that would be nice to have from time to time.
But I mean, it's good to keep that perspective. And I think, from being in that sea level, which we've both been in, I think I think it's a perspective that's lost. And it's definitely a perspective that I tried to keep when I was at that sea level. But I also understand how hard it is to keep that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, even at the CEO level, I mean, obviously we don't understand the chief executive level. But at the same time, I feel like there's a certain point that you have to make that effort. And I mean, yeah, we both understand at somebody like Satya's level, yeah, you can't make that effort because when you have like what 30,000, 40,000 people, yeah, you can't. There's no feasible way
I
you
think
can
it's
do
like
that.
150.
Whatever, tomato,
I have
tomato,
I have
asshole.
9 managers above me to get to him.
Smart ass. You get my point.
I'll take it. Take it.
Hey,
Yeah.
that's 9 degrees of separation I don't have. I will never get close to meeting the man. You might. So,
And seeing both perspectives, to be honest, because before Microsoft, a lot of my experience has been in smaller companies. I've been in companies where I was employee number 12, and when I left, there was a few hundred. And I've had some of those options where I could walk into, the office structure was that the partners were at a desk on the main floor as everyone else, and that interaction. And I've seen that growth as well as the company grew and offices were formed, and then we had the C-suite row of people and that change of it, um, where you start losing that disconnect. You start losing wondering, hey, are the people running this really, there's other departments as a C-suite person are my lieutenants running it the way it needs to be ran. And I said, I think when you bring in new people, you bring in new perspectives, you bring in new worries, you bring in new doubts, and you gotta constantly. Culture is always changing, so those processes in your company should kind of always change. It's a living organism, and so you have to have those touch points from time to time. I think is it's a scale issue, and once you start scaling, you apply patterns, and those patterns start getting into, well, you're a front end guy, thinking development, you're a front end developer, you're a back end developer, and then you start getting pigeonholed and siloed into these things to make it work because you can scale it easily. In that sense, when you apply a template to it, and you lose the personal touch, and you can't lose that.
well, I mean, I think that's where, even with a template, you've got to be open to having, those touch points to make sure that if someone's been pigeonholed as a front end engineer, but they want to grow in the back end side of things, then you're able to help facilitate that growth and get them moved back over to that piece.
Yeah,
And that grows very heavily on that imposter syndrome side of things. Like they feel like, hey, I'm really good at front end, but I'm supposed to be this full stack developer and I don't know anything about the back end here. I don't know how
yeah,
any of it works. And like they're like, "Oh, you're a full stack developer at so and so at Microsoft. Cool. How does, the back end of Teams work?" I don't fucking know. Never even seen
yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, you go into some deep dark hole of one application. You're like, I don't know. Give me some time to. And then again, you get in those calls where they want you to know it on the spot, and you're like, well, if I can work with it for a couple of days, I'm sure I can figure it out. Um, yeah, it's one thing thing of as we've been talking here, we've been talking a lot about what companies could do to embrace a better culture for that. And also on the flip side of that, though, I think it's important for the individual to have some introspection as well to understand and have some mechanisms, coping. You can call them coping mechanisms. It feels like a strong word for what it is, but introspection to know what's going to trigger that, and also what they need to do to help get over it. when I hired individuals in our development team, I always left them a promise of, hey, when you come, you'll leave a better engineer than when you come in. That's my goal. I never anticipated them to stay for a long time. I never anticipated them to have the loyalty of like, well, I gave you all this, so you should stay here. But at the same time, you need to allow your workforce to improve and be better. And there comes some of that imposter syndrome, right? Because you're going to be learning new things. Maybe you're going from, one technology stack to the other, and you have to learn that. But knowing that you're setting up an environment for them to learn, giving them the tool sets they can learn, and setting those expectations to allow them to fail at times. It kind of plays into that quick to fail concept, in my opinion, when it comes to this. Is allowing them to have a safe place to fail, and realizing, hey, if I shoot myself in the foot here because I try to do something above and beyond and didn't turn out, there's not going to be repercussions for that. If anything, you're going to be like, hey, I appreciate you trying to put in that extra work. So it didn't work. Great. We learned from it, right? That's the thing. From that failure, you learn. You hear that from motivational speakers all over the place, right? That everyone learns from the failures. We all do. I think anytime we talk about the history of our developments, it's always the really horrible deploys that happened. And you're like, those are the pain of development, the scars that I have from my career that I remember, or those major failures. And everyone needs to have them. And you need to set up a place, a way that when they do happen for individuals, that the company's safe, but that they're safe as well. But knowing, again, back to like that self-reliant aspect of it, for me, imposter syndrome is always back, and it's on my shoulder all the time, because I'm always trying to do something new, trying to stretch my abilities. So you always wonder, okay, am I really ready? But then you got to think, you know what, I'm doing it. My way of overcoming imposter syndrome was just putting my head down and going through it and be like, you know what, no one else is willing to do it. I'm willing to do it. So if this fails, then and someone doesn't like it, then forget them, because they didn't do it. It was a little bit of just not caring about the opinions and the effects around the world, around your 3-foot world, to accomplish something. And not giving up, and just keep going, keep chugging at it. As a junior engineer, my advice has always been to say yes to every new request and challenge. If your management comes to you and says, hey, can you do this, you just say yes. You do it. You work through, you grind through it, and you learn from that. And yeah, you become completely feel inadequate of doing it, but in the end, you are then capable of doing it. And guess what, you conquered that mountain, but now you're going to be asked something else, and that top of that mountain is the bottom of that next mountain you're going to be asked to climb. And it's just a rinse and repeat process. And just, I think, identifying that, I feel like a lot of people, at least I take from like news medias and stuff, is like, we have this anxiety, we have this imposter syndrome, and it's just, we have to deal with it. I think that's like, we all do if we're growing. How do we manage it? How do we corral it and control it so it doesn't control us? Because the worst thing you want is a developer to quit that has his aspirations, quit because of that imposter syndrome, and then change careers and the potential that they could have had.
But I think a lot of that actually comes back to the mental health of the engineers in the industry, and like the lack of importance that's put on an
Mm-hmm.
engineer's mental health. Because at the end of the day, it's about, how much code did you push out, how much value did you bring to the company, and not enough of an importance from the company perspective, or from even the engineer's perspective. You know, it's kind of a toss up on, who puts that importance on that well-being.
Mm-hmm.
It is, but I definitely think from both aspects, there's not enough of an importance put on that mental health.
Yeah.
The company side, I mean, obviously that stems all the way from the top, and definitely from the managers or the leaders of those actual engineers need to put more of an importance on that. They need to work with their engineers to be like, hey, are you okay? Like, how are you doing today? Like, how are you doing this week? And that's definitely not done enough at all,
Yeah.
in my opinion. But also from an engineer's perspective, like those engineers need, not only for themselves, but for the engineers around them. Like, you don't have to be best friends with the other engineers on your team, but they're going through the same struggles you're going through, and they deserve just as much as you do to know that the other people on their team are there trying to help figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So just checking in with them, being like, hey, how are you guys doing today? Like, do you need anything? Like, and even if you can't offer to help them, just being like, hey, how you guys doing today? And even if you guys are there just to vent to each other, I think that's a huge help, to your fellow engineers. I definitely know that, for me working with other senior engineers, like there's been times where we've just jumped on a Discord channel off of, obviously off of work channels, and just bitched about work. Just been like, fuck that place, And I mean,
Yeah.
like, it's good to just sometimes get it out,
Yeah.
and it's good for mental health. And I'm just, I think more of that needs to be done, in my opinion.
Yeah. Uh, I would say it's unique in our sector, but I have not worked in other departments of marketing and sales. But I feel like developers have an interesting romance with eat, sleep, drink, and code all the time. And I say that by being one of those people. My previous employment, my whole identity when I got this one job in the startup was everything I could do there. I had an aspirational goal of a certain job title, and I did everything I needed to do to get there. Whether it was picking up slack, whether it was working week, uh, long hour weeks, being willing to jump on the sword for deploys and really focusing on, hey, did I have a good day? I had a good day because the deploy went well, or I had a good day because I was able to finish these 6 features in time, and really became unhealthy, to be honest. So, you talk about that, the mental health there. And when that career path ended and life moved on and change happens, it took a long time for me to disassociate and detach from that identity and say, okay, I'm still an engineer, but I can still have other hobbies, other things to do. Because, our field's always changing, it's always growing. There's something new coming out all the time. And so you always feel like you have to stay on top of that to stay relevant. We always talk about that. You're constantly learning. And so again, there's that imposter syndrome, right? Because we're constantly learning. There's something new. Every month, all the big tech companies come out with all the new frameworks and tools and evolution of the process we're working. You're like, well, not only on top of my business I work at and those, I now have to learn the frameworks and the new things to do that. Because if I have to go to a different job in 2 years, I got to make sure I'm relevant.
Yeah.
And it's overwhelming. And and that varies by person how overwhelming that is. And it's hard because that's mental health too. You're like, oh, here we go again. Okay, I got to relearn these things. And there are times and years I've had that moment and I've really hated it. And other times I'm just like so excited, like, oh, here's the new, yearly conference. I want to go check out the new stuff coming out. But I feel like that's rare in our sector, and having that mental health there of, being able to disassociate and separate from it.
But I think that's actually getting worse now with, with everybody getting laid off in mass. And it's unfortunately it's not tied to just, developers. And I mean, you're looking at the gaming sector. I mean, granted there are,
Yeah.
developers in the gaming sector, but I mean, you're looking at game designers, you're looking at recruiters. I mean, people are getting laid off in mass in every
Yeah.
fucking sector right now.
Yeah.
And, that's going to not only affect the fact that, everybody's going to start suffering from imposter syndrome. They're like, fuck, I was getting, all this great feedback. Now they're laying off, what was it, like 1,900 people at fucking Blizzard Activision.
Yeah.
And, but the profits are still skyrocketing. Like, what the fuck do we do with that? Like,
Yeah.
how are we supposed to not have imposter syndrome when we're getting laid off in mass, but you guys are still making bank?
Well, and I'd say not only laid off, but then not being able to find another job for multiple months. I
Yeah.
see that in LinkedIn a lot too. Like, here's my 312th resume submission. And you're like, damn. And this person is very smart and very capable in their career and where they were at and is relevant. And then you're stressed out too, because you're like, man, well, I hope I don't get laid off tomorrow, because if I have to compete with that person to get that one job, I'm screwed. Again, I'm
Yep.
back to detailing cars. And this is, coming from me, who I've been in the field for 15 years and various standpoints, that you're like, ooh, I don't want to, have to compete with these people.
Yeah.
It's scary, especially when you have, family, kids, people that depend on you. But it comes
What
to,
if,
again, to counteract that is some of that self-reliance and make sure you're set up for it.
yeah. What I mean, there's ways to beat that, but right now everybody's doing what they can to
Dude, every time
not
you
get
open up the
laid off.
news, another company has laid off,
Yeah.
10, 15% of their technology department. And you're like, oh man, when is the axe coming for us? And I agree with you. There's a lot of bored people that are making a lot of money still, that their job's not affected. And I wouldn't call it a corporate greed, because if I could be on that board making the money, I would. You hope that we would have a different opinion of how we would run it, but would we really? You know, I'm
What I
honest
mean,
with myself to say that, to be like, well, maybe I'd hope I would be different, but I'm sure they hoped they would be different when they jumped into it.
yeah,
I
but
don't
then
know,
you have people like Nintendo, and I mean,
Yes,
Nintendo.
he was that was fantastic.
I mean, he cut his by 50%. The rest of the board cut theirs by 20%, and they didn't lay off anybody. So,
Hmm.
I mean, there's always an exception to every rule, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. If you're willing to, and again, that's I feel like that kind of comes back to what we're talking about. Where does the culture sit within the stack from the CEO to the bottom? Is you have to make sure you have all the right people in place. Nintendo had fantastic people on the board and the CEO to be willing to make the cut for the other people. And I loved his explanation of why. And he's like, how do I expect to have loyalty and come up with the best quality products if my employees are worrying about being cut?
Yep.
If you can't enjoy yourself, your survival. And you see that in society in multiple different facets. You talk about from a income standpoint, from those that don't make much to make a lot. When you're trying to survive, you're not looking at how to better yourself, or raise the quality of life. You're just trying to survive and get by to the next meal.
Yep.
Developers be the same way. You just like, I'm just waiting for that call or that email. So why would I work on this? Why would I care? Why would I put the umph? And it's kind of like a domino effect from that. When you have a bunch of developers in that mode, your products are going to lack, and then that lacking is going to hit your customers, and that customer is going to affect your revenue, and that's going to come around in 6 months in your finances. Those decisions where Simon Sinek says the best way is having that infinite mindset and trying to look at the near side and adjust to make sure you find that endpoint
When
and
I
reach it.
think, I think another thing that they're not realizing, and something else that's going to come from this is that, you and I have talked about this before, and I know plenty of people, and honestly, I've gotten to this point at points during my career, is that I sometimes just want to disappear into the woods and never look at another line of fucking code in my life. And imposter syndrome is a big part of that. And when there's people being laid off in mass, you can't find another fucking job. And people are still making record profits. It just
It's
feeds
hard.
further into that. Like, it's
Yeah.
gonna turn off the idea of becoming an engineer for a living. Why would people want to become an engineer just to get laid off and watch other
Hmm.
people reap the benefits? Like, it's going to have a massive effect on the job outlook
Yeah.
for the engineering market, for the software engineering market, for the web industry, as a whole, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I think those companies could do better, because evolution is going to always happen, right? In our sector, it happens more frequently than others, maybe, but it's guaranteed. Cloud computing, the internet, as we go back in history, it changed the landscape of how we work in the tech sector. I think what I would love to see is when companies know, because these big companies know this change is coming.
Yeah.
OpenAI and ChatGPT didn't just come out of the blue on a Tuesday and go, oh man, look, the CEO was like, oh wow, look what we got here. Let's go make billions of dollars. No, they worked on it for a while. And to be able to come up with a plan to upskill those, and I'll take Microsoft for instance here. They laid off what, 11,000 people when the AI came in, because they had to re-switch. And I don't know the details of the decision making, but all these companies coming out saying, oh, we're reshifting our priorities. So we're freezing the hiring, or we're laying off departments because we're prioritizing. And then what they're going to do is they lay off all these people. and then they're going to reshift their company, and then they're going to have all these slots to hire new people. And so then hiring begins again. And you're like, why don't we upskill, this individual that you're going to lay off in this apparently archaic sector they're in as of yesterday, and bring them over into what's the new modern thing? Keep your workforce,
Yep.
upskill, grow, become a better professional than when you came in. And, because it's expensive to hire people, it's expensive to fire people, from a company standpoint. And it's like, let's upskill them, let's train them, and then everyone is evolved, everyone is keeping up with the standards. And then they freaking will die for that company because they trust it, they have loyalship there. Yeah, and to me, it's a win-win. Is it a little harder to do? Hell yeah, it's harder to do. But
But I
in
mean,
this
not
particular
really.
instance today, you're not hiring an AI professional right now that's a pro dev AI guru. No, it doesn't exist. We're all learning on our own outside of, maybe the engineers in the AI, sector of open AI and the aspects of the big tech guys. But if little or, again, the small, medium companies are firing people because they're going to, think of like data scientists in that sector. I hear there's a lot of riff right now because those
Hmm.
data analysts, data that are waiting for all this LLM stuff to just, you know, toast them. The Power BI dashboard report guys and perspectives of data mining. I've heard a lot of rumors they're just waiting to be, assimilated and totally gone and kicked out. It's like, well, let's evolve that role and upskill them and empower them into the next phase and let them be the frontiers of that forefront of that specific initiative.
Yep.
And I bet you they'd move mountains for you.
What I mean, you are completely circumventing imposter syndrome for them. You're creating a new SME line for them, and like you're building that trust with them. So yeah, it's a no-brainer. Like, I mean, like, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't think that you're ever, unless you own a business, you're never going to get the same amount of buy-in that you would from someone that owns the business. It's
And you shouldn't expect it.
exactly.
I wouldn't, as someone who runs some, I would not expect anyone below me that's not getting the same percentage of equity to die on the sword as I would.
Exactly. But at the same time, you're going to get more out of the person that you're willing to go to bat for and try to help beat that imposter syndrome and put
Mhm.
the time and effort into than you are to just fucking let them go because AI, the magic button, is going to come
Yeah,
along
yeah,
and save
yeah.
everything.
Well, what's it going to be in 12 years for the next evolution, and how's that going to affect our sector? We had the cloud in 2010 that revolutionized everything. The whole on-premise data center industry, the system admins had a total shakeup for their industry.
And it's bullshit because I've worked at, the last three jobs I've worked at still have had on-prem shit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous. Like, and I mean, they know it's antiquated, but I mean, even Epic, like they're just now getting to the point where they are offloading their on-prem systems.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we're in 2023 and we're just now getting to the point where the biggest EHR in the world is getting off their on-prem systems.
Yeah. Oh, it's the same in the finance world. COBOL is like the inner layer of the onion for the finance system.
Fucking insane.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, we got to innovate. And how do you innovate properly? So then,
Get rid of COBOL.
yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you there. It's just when you have the CEOs and the board members making these decisions of what's valuable and what investment to put in the technology, it's always funny to me because they will placate and think they're making a what's the word I'm looking for? A compromise with you. Like, oh, we'll lower our salary and we'll take a performance. We'll just purely get paid off a performance bonus of what's coming down, the pipeline. We don't know, but this way you won't get fired. We're not going to do raises, but we're not going to fire you. And then they drop some big bomb, the evolution of what we have right now with AI, and you realize their performance bonus is gigantic because they knew what was coming down the pipeline.
Yep.
And I should be ecstatic that I didn't get fired, even though I kept doing my job and performing and excelling in my job through this. So I don't really take the CEO pay cut thing as a super, oh, you have my heart in your mind, perception. I think it's piss poor planning of what you hired. I really do. Like,
Yeah.
I got hired in some of that, so I appreciate my job 100%. But when you have to mass layout, and everyone's doing it now, right? Everyone, Salesforce, everyone. Uh, um, yeah, overstock.com. I mean, you can throw out the list of names and everyone. SMC companies are laying off people 10%, 15%. You're like,
Yeah,
why did you overhire so much? Why did you need to hire so many people
and
to just cut
there's
them
a
off?
website. There's a website for it, right? Like layoffs.fyi or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They started tracking it. Yeah, exactly. And how many people and how often. And it's like, if you overhired this much, that's just poor planning from a leadership perspective. I don't care how you cut that. There was no need to hire all those people, or it was a poor execution of the interview process and hiring the people for our culture, and not necessarily for our culture, but the skill sets we really need.
Yeah.
I, yeah. So I could see a lot of imposter syndrome, or that action affecting a lot of imposter for those that are in that cut. I thought I was amazing, and now they say I suck. And
And I
how,
mean,
how
that
do
could
you?
be indirectly as well. I mean, like they could not tell them anything and just lay off like 10% of the company, and like just the layoff in general is enough to be like, oh, well, you suck because you weren't the part of the 90% that we kept.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, I mean, I get that. Like being a part of the 10% that didn't get to stay. I mean, I can understand how demoralizing that is. I mean, it's fucking
Yeah.
bullshit.
Well, we're very logical in our field, right? In our engineers, the way we look at things. And I always found it funny that we put these performance checks on our work. Is, hey, did Aaron work better than Brian this quarter? He's going to get a bigger bonus. And they always talk about, oh, how do we know Aaron worked better than Brian, or vice versa? How do you write into that competition? And I compared it very much to when you're doing sprint planning. It's going to get really nerdy here. Sprint planning, and you judge your sprint, which is a week or 2 weeks of work for a particular project. For those that don't understand sprint planning, but you judge the amount of work and then the workforce you have to do the work, and you have this velocity chart. And the velocity chart is supposed to tell you how efficient and effective your sprint work is, and if you're going to fall off the chart, like if you need more work or less work. And I despise that chart so much because now it is putting human beings in the spot of a machine planning and efficiency.
Yep.
And I don't know about you, but I have had times where I've had a week and I have rocked through so much code features left and right. Like it's just coming out of my fingertips. It was like a magical week. And then the next week, I've spent 4 days trying to figure out one damn function and trying to figure out how I can stop this, Stack Overflow exception.
Yep.
And if you compare it by lines of code, which a lot of non-techs like to joke, oh, how much lines of code you write? You're like, well, I wrote 6, but I have 400 spaces in line breaks, so I wrote 600 lines of code. Count all the brackets, name them one by one. Or is it complexity? Or is it the impact to the product you're working on? You may build 90% of it. It's that 80-20 rule, right? You build 80% of it, that's great. But Brian built 20% of it, and that's the effective part that's really making the money for the company out of that product. But hey, Aaron's a better engineer because he wrote more code. Like I hate that comparison to try and figure out who gets the bonus or who's the better performer.
Yeah.
And in the rat race. And that leads to a lot of, I've seen people doubt, like, why do I not get my bonus? As I've talked to them, how come I don't get my bonus? I feel I've worked as much as he has or she has. And if you don't do that right, again, that's another culture that's leading you down to a pit of imposter syndrome, that helps just flare that up some more. You're like, well, no matter how much I work, I'm never good enough compared to these other people.
Well,
You
I
easily
think
could
that
be, or even better.
I think that's one of the reasons why when I've built out, I mean, unfortunately, I've never gotten to really build this out the way I wanted to, but whenever I'm trying to build out a plan for how an engineer is able to kind of excel and reach that status where they are able to build a good bonus structure for themselves, it's more about individual KPIs for them than it is necessarily how many lines of code did they write, or
Hmm.
like it's like, what do we need you to accomplish as an individual, and not necessarily like how do you stack up to this other person, because it doesn't fucking matter how they stack up to that other person. It matters how they stack up to what they started as, to what they are now.
Yeah.
And that's the way it should be. Like it should be that. And I think that's one of the ways that, as a leader, we can help combat that imposter syndrome. um, but that's where we need that top down mentality also fed in, because unless we are given that opportunity to help, you know actually allow us to do that, we can't do it.
Yep.
And unfortunately, a lot of engineering shops are run with, oh no, we need to see how this velocity chart looks. And it's like, well, it looks like shit. I can tell you that now.
We just flatline.
Yeah. It's like,
Well, yeah.
I've not been on a single fucking team in the last 4 years that has ever passed a fucking sprint, because every time there's fucking scope creep, or somebody wants to fucking like screw something up halfway through, and then the fucking sprint fails.
Well, how dare, or a senior developer go, oh, yeah, that'll take us 3 days, but then the devil's in the details and it takes you 7 days.
Yeah, exactly.
That always happens because, yeah, I don't like that chart. Even when you go into the Scrum certification course and stuff, they try to disclaim, hey, this report shouldn't be used about driving your team. It's like, then just take the fucking report out of the whole thing and let's not even worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, I think it'd be great to, see what our listeners have of their experiences with imposter syndrome, because I think it's a spectrum like everything else. I think there's a spectrum of the effects of it and how shallow and deep it goes. And it would be interesting to see how people cope with it. I'm curious, and we all help each other grow, and hopefully that someone's tips or tricks, so to speak, of how to deal with it helps someone else. Because that's why we're all here, right? We're all here to be better. We're all here to help each other. That's why we do this community stuff. At least for me, I know, I'll speak for you, Aaron, because I know we've had these conversations. That's why we do this, is to help those that are going through the paths that we've already been through, and to figure out, okay, how does the next generation become better?
Yep.
So yeah, we help each other. I love it.
Exactly. Yeah, so definitely share your experiences with us through either LinkedIn or Facebook. Shoot us an email through the website. Definitely reach out to us if you might want to be featured on the podcast. We're taking pretty much anybody that'll come on that's in the engineering field, junior, mid-level, senior. Hell, even if you're in leadership, give us a shout. We'd love to have you on. So thanks for listening.
Yes.
And give us a follow. We're still pretty new. So, every follow we get definitely helps us get out to more engineers, more people in the software engineering field. And we'd love to have everybody we can get.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Till next time.